Just after midnight, inside a dimly lit intelligence bunker on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, a red warning light began to flash. A senior analyst pushed aside a stack of encrypted files and opened the latest intercept. What appeared on the screen was chilling even by military standards. It was a reconstructed map connecting a series of covert operations, political assassinations, destabilization campaigns, and proxy militias stretching across West Africa for nearly 5 decades. At the center lay a hidden network of influence that foreign powers had quietly maintained, often without the knowledge of the governments they claimed to support. The web was larger, more coordinated, and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. For ordinary families across the Sahel, these shadow operations have always been felt, but rarely understood. In a quiet village outside Koudougou, a father named Alassane still remembers the night unidentified helicopters flew low over the fields, hours before a sudden coup forced his community into chaos. To him, instability was not an abstract geopolitical theory. It was the sound of doors being kicked in and neighbors disappearing without explanation. When he heard on the radio that investigators were finally uncovering the concealed networks behind these events, he whispered a silent prayer that the truth might bring closure to the suffering his village endured. But now the stakes are far higher. Recent intelligence suggests that these foreign-backed networks have not disappeared. They have simply adapted, shifting tactics, infiltrating political parties, media outlets, and even humanitarian groups to continue shaping West Africa's destiny from behind the curtain. Analysts warn that the same hands responsible for coups in the 1980s may still be operating today under new names and new mandates. Before we break down the classified findings that triggered this investigation, consider one unsettling question. If a region has been manipulated for decades through hidden channels, how many of its leaders have been making decisions freely? And how many have been guided by invisible pressure they could never name? If this question already gives you pause, stay with me. What we are about to uncover is not speculation, but a pattern of influence meticulously pieced together from intelligence leaks, declassified documents, and military field reports. This is the beginning of understanding how a continent fought for sovereignty while foreign powers silently pulled the strings. The deeper we go, the more disturbing the picture becomes. And according to the newly surfaced evidence, the first thread that unravels this secret web leads to an unexpected player. Intelligence files declassified in fragments over the past year reveal an operation far larger and far more coordinated than most analysts ever imagined. For decades, a hidden network moved silently across West Africa, influencing political transitions, shaping military appointments, and guiding decisions that should have belonged only to the people who lived there. This network did not operate through open conflict. Instead, it used a quieter and more calculated strategy: covert funding, targeted disinformation campaigns, shadow negotiations with key officers, and carefully timed political pressure applied at moments when nations were vulnerable. The complexity of this system stunned even veteran intelligence officers who reviewed the documents. At the center of these revelations is a pattern that repeats itself across Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, and several coastal nations. Each time a government began asserting too much independence over its natural resources or security decisions, instability followed. Suddenly, extremist groups expanded into areas previously considered secure. Media outlets with foreign funding began amplifying internal disagreements. A handful of political figures appeared from nowhere with polished campaigns and unexpected financial backing. These were not coincidences. Internal memos show that certain foreign agencies monitored these regions with precision, identifying pressure points and activating local partners to influence outcomes without leaving fingerprints. On the ground, the impact was devastating. In a rural district near Dori, a local officer named Hamidou remembered how his unit received conflicting orders during a major security breach. Communications that should have been clear became scrambled. Reinforcements that were promised never arrived. Later, intelligence analysts discovered that a foreign-backed political group had been lobbying to weaken the authority of regional commanders. Hamidou realized that he had been caught inside a manipulation he could not see, serving a mission whose purpose he never agreed to. His frustration reflects the silent pressure thousands of soldiers felt while fighting enemies that seemed to appear exactly when political tensions rose. Another disturbing detail in the leaked files involves election cycles. In multiple countries, spikes in violence occurred simultaneously with key parliamentary debates or leadership transitions. These waves of unrest created an environment where foreign-funded advisors could step in, offering stability plans that subtly reshaped military decisions. To many citizens, the timing felt unnatural, but without access to classified intelligence, no one could prove it. Now, with fragments of documents surfacing, the pattern becomes unmistakable. For Western observers unfamiliar with the region, these revelations are uncomfortable. The documents do not point to a single foreign actor, but rather to a network of overlapping interests that used Africa as a strategic battlefield without ever declaring open involvement. Some nations sought access to minerals. Others wanted military positioning. A few were concerned about ideological influence. Together, these forces created a web so intricate that even seasoned African leaders found it difficult to separate truth from deception. What makes this story even more troubling is that many local actors participated without understanding the full scope. Some believed they were receiving support for development projects. Others thought they were partnering with neutral advisors. In reality, they were unknowingly strengthening a network designed to keep African nations dependent, divided, and politically predictable. But the most dangerous part of this system was still hidden. Deep inside the intelligence files lay a series of operations that connected multiple coups to a single foreign coordinating hub. And the location of that hub will shock anyone who believes they already understand West African geopolitics. As investigators dug deeper into the pattern of coups, one revelation pushed the story into dangerous territory. Intelligence analysts discovered that the coup attempts were not isolated bursts of chaos, but synchronized actions carried out with almost military precision. Communications intercepted from a desert relay station in northern Niger showed encrypted transmissions sent just hours before government collapses in two different West African capitals. The signals came from a source that has never been publicly identified, but every analyst who reviewed the data agreed on one detail. This was no rebel militia. It was the work of professional intelligence operators with experience in psychological warfare, political disruption, and covert logistics. Inside a secure briefing room in Ouagadougou, senior officers gathered around a dimly lit table covered with satellite photos and red-marked timelines. One officer, a veteran who had served for more than 20 years, pointed to a cluster of coordinates where foreign aircraft had entered Sahel airspace without filing official flight plans. The pattern matched almost perfectly with the timing of several political uprisings. He spoke quietly, not out of fear, but out of the weight of what this information implied. If foreign intelligence agencies had indeed orchestrated these events, then West Africa had been fighting shadows for decades, unaware of the true enemy shaping its fate. Civilian reactions varied from fear to long-suppressed anger. In a small cafe in Bamako, a former journalist named Abdurrahman read the classified findings leaked online and whispered that he had suspected this for years. He recalled interviewing local politicians who admitted, off-camera, that they often faced pressure from embassies and multinational corporations. They were told which policies to pass, which alliances to avoid, and even which public statements they were allowed to make. Some of them refused and were removed from power weeks later. Reading the intelligence report felt less like a discovery and more like confirmation of a truth people were too afraid to say aloud. The emotional breaking point came when analysts uncovered a chilling detail. Foreign operatives had not only manipulated governments, but had infiltrated social movements, student protests, and even religious organizations. Their goal was not to help or build stability, but to keep societies divided enough to prevent unified African leadership. A single sentence in one intelligence memo stood out. Fragmentation ensures control. For many, that line represented decades of stolen progress and shattered aspirations, engineered by hands that never intended to be seen. International reaction was swift and defensive. European media tried to reframe the findings, suggesting that instability was caused by internal tribal conflicts, not foreign interference. American analysts publicly denied involvement, but admitted privately that certain operations conducted by Western allies in the 1980s and 1990s might have contributed to today's instability. For the first time, the official narrative cracked. The world was forced to confront a possibility long dismissed, that West Africa had never been allowed to determine its own future. At the local level, the revelation ignited a sense of awakening. Families who had lost loved ones in conflicts began questioning whether their grief had been orchestrated by forces far beyond their borders. In a remote village in Burkina Faso, an elderly woman named Safiatou held a picture of her son, a soldier killed during an uprising a decade earlier. She asked a single question that carried the weight of thousands of lives. If my son died fighting for his country, then who was the enemy he was truly fighting? No intelligence report could answer her, but her question became the rallying cry for a region demanding transparency, sovereignty, and justice. Governments across the Sahel responded with urgency. Emergency task forces were established, investigations reopened, and foreign intelligence contracts reviewed. But as the region moved to defend itself, one haunting question remained. If an invisible hand had shaped coups for decades, was it still active now? Were new destabilization plans already in motion, hidden inside diplomatic channels or corporate deals disguised as aid? Evidence emerging from a newly decrypted file suggests that the next phase of interference has already begun, and the target may be far larger than any single nation. Across West Africa, the true cost of the hidden coup network did not unfold in diplomatic halls or intelligence briefings, but in the lives of ordinary people who had no idea that foreign powers were pulling strings behind the scenes. In small border towns, parents kept their children indoors at sunset because they sensed instability rising even before news outlets acknowledged it. In mining regions, entire communities were pushed off their land after sudden political shifts that seemed random at the time, but, according to newly surfaced intelligence files, were engineered to secure access for foreign companies operating behind the shield of proxy leaders. The consequences were not abstract. They struck at homes, livelihoods, and the social fabric that held villages together. Take the case of a teacher from northern Burkina Faso named Amadou. For years, he believed the recurring unrest in his district was simply the result of local disputes and extremist infiltration. Only recently did he learn from radio reports that several of the political turnovers affecting his region had been quietly supported by external actors looking to install leaders who would loosen border controls. When he heard this, he told his neighbors that the feeling of betrayal was heavier than any fear he had previously known. Families had been displaced, schools shut down, and entire harvests lost, all because of a strategy designed continents away by individuals who never once spoke to the communities they disrupted. Politically, the effects were equally severe. Multiple states entered cycles of rapid leader replacement as factions supported by foreign sponsors jockeyed for power. Parliamentary reforms were halted, budget plans were rewritten, and national priorities shifted in a matter of weeks. Analysts reviewing 2 decades of data noticed a startling pattern. Every time a country attempted to tighten regulation over its natural resources or restrict foreign military logistics, a sudden political crisis emerged within the next 12 months. These crises were often followed by leadership changes, emergency agreements, or rushed security partnerships that restored foreign access. It formed a repeating rhythm that intelligence officers now describe as a signature of external manipulation. Inside government ministries, some civil servants began connecting the dots far earlier than the public. A mid-ranking official in Niger, who later fled to Ghana, revealed that he had noticed how unexplained financial donations appeared right before parliamentary votes on mining concessions. According to his testimony, representatives received anonymous pressure to approve contracts that offered shockingly low royalties for uranium extraction. When a small group of lawmakers resisted, their constituencies suddenly experienced spikes in violence, which diverted attention and weakened public resistance. These patterns created a chilling effect across the region. Even leaders committed to sovereignty hesitated to challenge foreign interests because they knew destabilization could erupt at any moment. Socially, the distrust created by covert foreign interference changed how West Africans viewed their own institutions. Community elders who once mediated disputes began questioning whether conflicts were genuinely local or fueled by unseen outside agendas. Youth movements, already frustrated by unemployment and corruption, became more suspicious of political announcements. Analysts observed that public confidence in national institutions declined sharply during periods correlated with covert influence operations. The psychological impact was profound. When people lose faith in their nation's ability to protect itself from manipulation, unity becomes fragile, and social cohesion weakens. Yet the consequences reached far beyond the civilians. Within the military ranks, suspicion spread rapidly. Officers began wondering which units were loyal to the constitutional order and which were unknowingly aligned with external networks. This breakdown of internal trust created openings for extremist groups, who exploited confusion by presenting themselves as alternatives to compromised state structures. Intelligence reports show that recruitment spikes often followed periods of political upheaval tied to foreign manipulation. In other words, every external push to destabilize a government indirectly strengthened non-state actors across the region. Economically, the damage was equally measurable. Development projects stalled because investors feared unpredictability. Taxes vanished into corruption channels supported by coup-aligned factions. Local businesses faced harassment at checkpoints controlled by units whose loyalty shifted, depending on which foreign actor was funding them at the time. A leaked financial analysis from 2017 estimated that West Africa lost nearly $6 billion in potential growth due to disruptions linked to politically motivated destabilization events. The cumulative effect of all this was a region forced into a reactive posture. Instead of shaping their own future, West African nations spent years responding to crises engineered to keep them dependent, divided, and vulnerable. For ordinary families, this meant lost opportunities, weakened institutions, and lives defined not by their choices, but by the agendas of distant powers. But if foreign interference shaped the past so deeply, what will happen now that African intelligence agencies have finally begun mapping the entire hidden coup web? From the perspective of American military intelligence, the revelations surrounding the hidden coup web forced analysts to reconsider long-held assumptions about West Africa. For decades, briefings described the region as vulnerable, fragmented, and reactive, but the newly uncovered patterns suggested something far more strategic and coordinated. The documents, field reports, and intercepted communications pointed to a long timeline of external interference, with foreign powers shaping leadership transitions, manipulating political factions, and influencing military appointments in ways that aligned with their economic and strategic interests. Inside the Pentagon's Africa Security Division, senior analysts compared the situation to a slow-moving chess match, where every coup attempt or sudden resignation looked less like internal chaos and more like the calculated effect of quiet foreign influence. One analyst described it as a layered operation, where financial pressure was used to weaken governments. Intelligence assets were placed within military councils, and proxy groups were empowered to tilt national direction whenever needed. This was not the Africa portrayed in outdated policy documents. This was a region under sustained manipulation from forces that preferred instability where alliances could be controlled. For many in Washington, the most concerning revelation was not the existence of foreign interference, but the scale of its penetration. Countries once considered reliable partners appeared to have intelligence structures compromised at multiple levels. In one internal report, a former U.S. field officer recounted a discussion with a West African commander who admitted that he no longer knew which advisors he could trust. The officer wrote that the real danger was not open conflict, but the erosion of sovereignty from within, the kind that leaves nations unable to make independent decisions, even in times of crisis. This assessment sent a quiet alarm through foreign policy circles, because it hinted that the region's instability might be less a product of local tensions and more the consequence of deliberate external engineering. Other global actors also took notice. European intelligence agencies, especially in France and Belgium, privately acknowledged that the shifting power dynamics could disrupt long-standing influence networks. Meanwhile, analysts in Russia and China appeared more interested in the vacuum of trust left behind, seeing opportunities to negotiate new military and economic relationship without Western oversight. The international landscape was changing rapidly, and every major power seemed prepared to reposition itself in ways that could reshape decades of geopolitical balance. But for all the global reactions, one question kept returning to the center of intelligence meetings in Washington. If foreign manipulation shaped the past of West Africa, who is shaping its future now? For decades, West Africa has lived inside an invisible battlefield, a place where foreign governments, intelligence firms, and private contractors quietly shaped political outcomes long before ordinary citizens understood what was happening. Tonight, as we pull back the curtain on this hidden coup web, a difficult truth becomes clear. The struggle for control of the Sahel has never been about elections alone. It has always been about power, resources, and the ability of outside actors to bend the future of entire nations. But something has changed. The people of the region, once unaware of the forces manipulating their destinies, are beginning to see the pattern. A new generation of leaders is refusing to play by the old rules. Communities that once lived in silence are now speaking openly about the pressure they felt from foreign operators. This shift is creating a moment unlike anything in recent memory, one where the old networks of influence are no longer guaranteed to survive. The question the world must now confront is whether West Africa is finally stepping out of the shadows, or whether those same networks will push back harder than ever. The answer will determine not only the stability of the Sahel, but the global balance of power for years to come. For an American audience watching from afar, this story carries a deeper lesson. When foreign powers manipulate fragile nations, stability does not stay contained. It spreads, reaching borders it was never meant to cross. It affects trade, alliances, and long-term security. That is why understanding the truth behind these hidden structures matters. It reminds us that peace is never an accident. It is the result of people refusing to accept exploitation as their fate. It is the result of leaders who choose sovereignty over submission. Before we close, I want to ask you something. If everything we uncovered tonight is real, And if these decades of interference truly shaped the lives of millions, then what responsibility do we have to pay attention? What responsibility do we have to stand with those fighting for dignity and self-determination? These are not abstract questions. They speak to the kind of world we hope to leave for our children and grandchildren. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, let that feeling guide you. Let it stir compassion. Let it stir clarity. And let it stir the desire to see justice prevail where manipulation once thrived. May God protect those who stand for truth across the Sahel. May He protect families yearning for peace after generations of turmoil. And may He guide all of us to recognize that even in the darkest networks of deception, the light of accountability can still break through. The next chapter is already unfolding. The only question left is whether the world is ready to face it.